Welcome, everyone. Today, we're going to pull back the curtain and really dig into the art and science of teaching language. We're going to explore the specific techniques that can take a grammar lesson from, kind of dry and forgettable to something that's dynamic and actually sticks with students. So, think back for a second to your own school days. I'm sure you can remember language classes that were genuinely fun and engaging, and others that, well, just fell flat. The difference wasn't the language itself, right? It was the method. The secret sauce, as we're about to see, is all in the technique. So here's our lesson plan for today. First, we'll cover why all this matters in the first place. Then we'll open up the toolkits for both grammar and composition. After that, we'll see how to connect them, which is crucial. And finally, we'll talk about how you can build your own perfect method. All right, first things first, why are we so focused on technique? Well, before we can even get into the what of teaching, we have to understand the how. This is really the fundamental philosophy that separates a good teacher from a truly great one. And here it is. This is the big idea. The goal isn't just to get students to memorize a bunch of rules. It's about making their language skills functional. Can they actually use the grammar correctly in a conversation? Can they write an email that makes sense? When the answer is yes, that's when learning becomes meaningful. Okay, so with that big idea in mind, let's open up our first toolbox. These are the main methods a teacher can use to explain the architecture of a language. In other words, the grammar. First up, we have the inductive technique. I like to call this the detective approach. Instead of just handing students the rule on a silver platter, you give them clues, a bunch of sentences, maybe a short story. Their job is to look for patterns and figure out the rule themselves. It might take a little longer, but it really gets them thinking, and that rule is way more likely to stick. And then you've got the more traditional approach, the deductive technique. This is the classic teacher at the front of the room model. You state the rule clearly, show a few examples of how it works, and then let the students practice it. This method is super time efficient, and honestly, it can be a lifesaver for really complex rules or when you're prepping for an exam. So let's put them side by side. On the left, you've got inductive, which is all about the learner leading their own discovery. On the right, you have deductive, which is more teacher-led and focused on getting the rule down pat. Now, one isn't better than the other, they're just different tools for different jobs. And of course, the toolkit doesn't stop there. You can teach grammar contextually, weaving it into stories so it feels totally natural. You can take a communicative approach with role plays where the whole point is just to communicate an idea. And you know what? Sometimes good old-fashioned drill and practice is exactly what a student needs to build that muscle memory. Okay, so we have the tools for understanding the architecture of language. Now, let's talk about the art of actually building something with it. It's time to open up the composition toolkit. When you're teaching writing, you usually start with one of two paths. On the left, you have guided composition. This provides scaffolding, things like outlines, keywords, maybe some pictures. It's perfect for beginners because it helps reduce that fear of the blank page. Then on the right, for more advanced folks, you have free composition. This is where you take the training wheels off and let them run with their own creative ideas. Now, this next technique, it's a total game changer. It reframes writing not as this one high-pressure event, but as a journey. The focus shifts away from just the final paper and onto the entire process of developing an idea. It's a much more realistic and way more effective way to teach writing. And this slide just lays out that journey perfectly. You start with planning, then you get to drafting, which is just about getting your thoughts down on paper, no judgment. After that comes revising, where you look at the big picture. Then you have editing for all the tiny details like grammar and spelling. And finally, rewriting, where you add that last layer of polish. It teaches a really important lesson. Good writing is almost always about good rewriting. And just like with grammar, there are other tools here too. Collaborative writing gets students working in groups, learning from each other. And you can use creative activities, like writing diary entries or little dialogues, to make the whole process feel less like an assignment and more like play. And that's fantastic for building their voice. So, we've got our grammar toolkit, and we've got our composition toolkit. And look, they're both really powerful on their own. But the real magic, the absolute highest level of teaching, happens when we start connecting them. This right here, this is probably the single most important takeaway today. The best teachers, they don't treat grammar and writing as separate subjects taught on different days. They understand that these two things have to be woven together constantly. And the source material just says it perfectly. Teaching connectors through paragraph writing ensures meaningful application. Think about it. You don't just learn a word like however from a worksheet. You learn it because you need it to connect to two ideas in your argument. You learn verb tenses by writing about what you did last weekend. That is the very definition of functional, meaningful learning. And that brings us to our final section where we put it all together. After looking at all of these different tools, how on earth do we build the perfect method for our own classroom? Well, here's the answer. There is no single best technique. An expert teacher is kind of like a master chef. They have all these different ingredients and techniques, and they know exactly how to combine them depending on the situation. The right mix always depends on the students, their level, and their goals. The real art is in the blend. So I'll just leave you with this question to chew on. If you were teaching the past tense to a group of total beginners, would you start with the detective approach or the classic one? How would you weave in a writing activity to make it really stick? Because now that you have the toolkit, the possibilities are pretty much endless. And that right there is the real art of teaching.